Welcome to God and Country Biblical Exposition. This week is part 7, the final program in my summer series, Must Know Truths About Israel. I began with just wanting to do one update program about the war in Gaza, but it turned into a 4 to 5 hour teaching session divided into 7 programs. When it comes to the nation of Israel, there are so many issues and so many biblical texts that must be addressed. And at some point, every Christian needs to come to know these things. Well, let's review. Point number 1, the state of Israel is a sign in God's prophetic timetable. Point number 2, the scripture tells us that Israel, in her return from exile, will be unclean, impure, and unholy. Point number 3, there is an unbiblical rise of anti-Zionism in the evangelical church. Point number 4, according to prophecy, God will be moving the Jews back to the land of Israel. Point number 5, the land of Israel belongs to the Jews. Biblically, they still have God-given land rights. Point number 6, the goal of the enemy of Israel is to kill the Jews. Point number 7, a third temple will most likely be rebuilt in Jerusalem. And point number 8, this week's program, America's providential support for Israel. Now, if we step back and think about the world situation, it's amazing that the most powerful, the most financially blessed nation on earth happens to be the number one supporter of Israel. There's a reason that the false religion of Islam calls Israel the little Satan and America the big Satan. And America happens to be the most Protestant Christian nation on earth. You say, but the majority of America is no longer Christian. Well, true, but America still has the most churches, the most Bible colleges, the most Christian radio and media, the most mission organizations, and the most Christian publishing houses. And that has a profound effect on the culture. It's an undeniable fact that the more Christian a nation is, the more it supports Israel. Christians read in their Bibles the famous Genesis chapter 12 text. God's word to Abraham. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great. And you shall be a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you. And the ones who curse you, I will curse. And in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. And in the book of Numbers, Christians read the words of Balaam about Israel. Blessed is everyone who blesses you, and cursed is everyone who curses you. And also Psalm 122:6, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May they prosper who love you. Now, yes, seasoned Christians may discover that Jesus pronounced a curse upon Jerusalem. Matthew 23, behold, your house will be left to you desolate. And in Revelation, the Apostle John calls Jerusalem Sodom and Egypt. And in Hebrews, the Jerusalem God wants believers to focus on is the heavenly Jerusalem. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 22. But you have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to myriads of angels. And also in Galatians chapter 4, verse 26, the Jerusalem above is free. She is our mother. The present Jerusalem is in bondage and slavery. And in all this, Christians come to realize that the blessing upon Abraham's descendants is really the blessing on the true Israel of God, the followers of Messiah, the Christians. But nevertheless, Christians will still read Genesis chapter 12 and Psalm 122 at face value. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May they prosper who love you. And God knows that his people will read these texts as referring to the Jews and literal Israel. So don't be so sure that national Israel is no longer a thing in God's program. God still makes a distinction between two groups in this world, Jews and Gentiles. At first, the Jews were given the opportunity and the work of the Spirit of the Lord to be part of Christ's kingdom. But now currently God says we're in the time of the Gentiles, where the Gentiles are given that opportunity and a work of the Spirit of God to be part of Christ's kingdom. And according to Luke 21 and Romans chapter 9, the time of the Gentiles will come to an end, and the Jewish people are again granted a special work of God. So don't be so sure the Jewish people, national Israel, no longer have some earthly promises in the program of God. At the very least, even though Paul writes in Romans chapter 11 that the Jews are the enemies of the gospel, and we should love our enemies, Paul also writes that the Jews should be beloved for the sake of the patriarchs. There may actually be a connection between America's national support for Israel and America's continual blessing, despite all of our current apostasies. Remember again the prophecy about the pagan Persian king Cyrus, who was called of God to support Israel's return from the first exile. Isaiah chapter 44, verse 28. It is I who say of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and he will perform all of my desire. He shall declare of Jerusalem, she will be built, and of the temple, your foundation will be laid. Then the prophecy goes on to explain how God will empower Cyrus and his nation to be able to support Israel. Cyrus and Persia will be given power over other nations, and God will give them treasures and hidden wealth, all for the sake of Jacob my servant. The amazing and unexpected aspect of this prophecy is that God doesn't help restore Israel to the land directly, but he uses a pagan Gentile nation to restore Israel. Why? To humble Israel? Maybe to teach Israel that Gentiles can also serve God. Nevertheless, there may be a pattern here. God may be using America, a Gentile nation, to help restore Israel. And we should be careful to be on the side of God's program. The nation that's on the side of God, especially in missions, will be blessed by God. Now, I say all this to poke at my Christian Reformed friends who hold to various forms of replacement theology, that the church has replaced Israel. I'm not a diehard dispensationalist myself. There's a ditch on that side of the road. But we must be open to what God is fully teaching in his word. Just because we read that Jerusalem above is our mother, don't take that and develop an anti-Israeli position when there are so many other prophetic scriptures that must be considered in regard to what God is doing with national Israel on earth. We may not know as much as we think we know. Now, in regard to the Jews, remember, Paul rebuked Gentile believers in Romans chapter 11, and Paul used three terms. Don't be arrogant, don't be conceited, and don't be wise in your own estimation in regard to Israel. How much clearer could the apostle be? Now, we can recognize the error in over-aggrandizing Israel and the Jews and still support Israel. Here's just one example. If you listen to conservative talk radio, there are constant ads urging conservatives to financially support the IFCJ, the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews Together. And the donations go to help build playgrounds in Israel, bomb shelters, food distribution. But realize this is not a Christian organization. It was started in 1983 by a Jewish man, Yahiel Eckstein. He died in 2019, and his daughter has now become president. They raise about $150 million a year, mostly from evangelicals. They have raised $1.5 billion since 1983. 75% goes toward their programs. 10% is administrative cost. And 14.3% is spent on fundraising. So that's about $20 million, and you can buy a lot of ads on conservative sites for $20 million. But here's the catch. According to Charity Navigator, the daughter pays herself a base salary of $650,000 a year. Not too shabby for helping out poor Jews in Israel. Now, this organization may do a lot of good and may be instrumental in causing more Jews to be open toward evangelicalism and the gospel, but let's not be unaware. There are many cheerleaders for Israel who are lining their pockets. I mean, even Nehemiah in the Old Testament had the same problem with some Jews trying to get rich off of the rebuilding of Israel back in 500 BC. But let's not be discouraged by the bad actors. Instead, let's support true missions to the Jewish people. I just use this as one example. Evangelical support for Israel doesn't mean we're not aware of the abuses, such as the selling of coins with pictures of Cyrus and Donald Trump. Are you aware of the secular atheistic spin put on Genesis chapter 12? The promise to Abraham that I'll bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. Well, for unbelievers, they begin with the premise that there is no God. So all religion has to be self-serving. Everything is about gaining power, the survival of the fittest. Therefore, every religion and every moral standard is a human construct created to gain power over others. And this is the basis for critical race theory. So unbelieving critics allege that some Jewish thinkers made up this whole story of God meeting with Abraham and promising to bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. What a great scam to use superstition to make your enemies fear you. That if you mess with the Jews, God is going to get you. Critics claim this is how the Jewish people, a weak group of people, were able to survive in a hostile world. And this is exactly what an ethnic group would come up with to scare their enemies, such as send a check to us, otherwise you'll be cursed. However, if there really is a God, and he really did choose Israel to represent him in the world, then Genesis 12 is exactly what we would expect from God. His providential protection over his people. Zechariah chapter 2 verse 8, he who touches you touches the apple of God's eye. Well, let's not become practical atheists and doubters concerning God's hand of providence, thinking of ourselves as too sophisticated or high-minded to believe in God's active blessing and cursing. Now, as far as America's support for Israel, if it weren't for the United States, Israel would not exist today. The United States was the primary backer of Israel becoming a nation back in 1948, and the U.S. is the primary supporter of Israel today. I have a map here of the world from Newsweek, and the nations are colored green that fully support Israel. And there's not much green on the map. In addition to America's support for Israel, there's also Argentina, Austria, Czech, Croatia, Hungary. India has also become friendly toward Israel since India has a Muslim problem. Papua New Guinea supports Israel because of its Christian consensus. Many European countries have started to grow cold toward Israel. France is not openly supportive of Israel because they want to keep their Islamic population happy. Ireland, Spain, and Norway are vehemently anti-Israel. The war in Gaza has really restarted the whole debate over Israel. Those who oppose Israel ideologically now have an occasion to again protest. Here's a map from Ground News. The countries in red are the ones that supported Israel in the latest UN resolution against Israel. But there's not much red. But here's an amazing thing. Although the majority of nations on earth oppose Israel, the United States has been able to veto all of their opposition to Israel at the UN. In the providence of God, after World War II, when Roosevelt set up the UN, in order to get the big nations on board, he had to give each of the 5 nations with permanent status on the Security Council the power to veto any resolution. So a veto from Russia, China, France, the UK, or the United States could prevent any binding resolution, meaning that the Security Council doesn't have the ability to act in accordance with the majority view. And that's why the UN has not been able to take down Israel, even though the majority of nations oppose Israel. Because the United States has vetoed the majority, and this was a turn of events from the Lord. The U.S. has vetoed resolutions critical of Israel 45 times, more vetoes than any other council member. And the U.S. has vetoed totally 89 Security Council resolutions since 1945, and over half of those vetoes have been resolutions against Israel. Just last week, the UN passed a resolution against Israel's war on Hamas and Gaza, calling for a ceasefire. The United States was the only country that vetoed that resolution. But look who we have as president. The most pro-Israel president in recent times. His own daughter is married to a Jewish man, and his grandkids go to synagogue. And look at who we have as our ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, a Baptist pastor. And look who we have as Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, a bulldog in supporting Israel. Remember this clip from about a year ago? Rubio answering reporters about Israel?
Senator Rubio, will you call for a ceasefire?
No, I will not.
Gaza?
On the contrary.
Rubio,
are you filming it?
Wait,
so I want you guys to get this. I want them to destroy every element of Hamas they can get their hands on. These people are vicious animals who did horrifying crimes. And I hope you guys post that.
And
that's
what
my
about
position.
the civilians that are being killed every day?
Hamas should stop hiding behind civilians, putting civilians in the way. Hamas knew that this was going to lead to this. So Hamas should stop building their military installations underneath hospitals.
So you don't care that 15,000 have died? You don't care about the babies that are being killed every day?
I think it's horrifying. I think it's terrible, and I think Hamas is 100% to blame. That's what I think. Make sure you post that, please.
It's that type of Christian worldview and moral conviction that's behind America's support for Israel. Now, many don't understand the spiritual worldview element, claiming that America's support for Israel is merely because Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, and we have a militarily strategic interest in Israel. But that's not the intrinsic reason. America's support for Israel is really based on America's Christian culture. Many Americans believe Israel has a special place in God's work in this world. And notice all of the atheistic communist countries in the world, they oppose Israel. And they also happen to support the totalitarian Islamic regimes. Now also, in regard to America's support for Israel, the U.S. provides tremendous amount of financial aid, $3.3 billion annually in military support, which means Israel must spend that money on buying U.S. military equipment. Israel is by far the largest recipient of U.S. aid. In April of 2024, Congress approved $14.3 billion in emergency military assistance for Israel, along with $9.2 billion for humanitarian aid. In September of 2024, under Joe Biden, the U.S. secured an $8.7 billion aid package for Israel, including $3.5 billion for wartime procurement and $5.2 billion for an air defense system. Many say Democrats thought this would help them win the Jewish vote. But regardless, it's still in the plan of God. In March of this year, the Trump administration approved another $12 billion in military support for Israel, sending $4 billion immediately. And last month, Trump approved $30 million to feed refugees in Gaza. America is Israel's greatest ally, and this is of God. Now, I want to conclude with a look at Revelation chapter 12, which is about God's defense of Israel during the last days, the apocalypse. Chapter 12 is clearly an allegorical vision. John begins by saying he saw a great sign that appeared in the heavens. A sign is that which represents something else. And what John sees is a woman bearing a child. And this child is to rule the nations. The woman could represent Mary, who bore Jesus, but it most likely represents Israel as a whole. For Israel brings forth the Messiah. And in the Old Testament, the nation of Israel is described as a woman, the spiritual wife of God. And in the New Testament, the church is also described as a woman, the bride of Christ. Anyway, this woman is clothed with the sun, and on her head is a crown with 12 stars. The woman is contrasted with the great harlot in Revelation 13, who represents false religion. This woman shines like the sun. So this is not really just about physical Israel, but the true believers in Israel throughout Israel's history. The Israel that's going to be in glory. The 12 stars on her head represent the 12 patriarchs of Israel, as we see in Joseph's dream in Genesis chapter 37, verse 9. The child who is born to her is definitely the Messiah. Then John sees a dragon wanting to destroy the child. The dragon is identified in Revelation 12:9 as Satan, the devil. So there's no guessing here. You don't have to be some great theologian to figure out the allegory of Revelation 12. I had it figured out when I was 12 years old. And all the commentators, even commentators from the Reformation, all have it figured out and agree. But despite Satan wanting to destroy this woman, the Israel of God, the elect of God, the woman flees into the wilderness where she has a place prepared by God so that there she would be nourished for 1,260 days, 3.5 years. Well, I wonder what that means. Well, in the previous chapter, there are 2 prophets in the Apocalypse who prophesy in Jerusalem for 1,260 days. And in chapter 13 of Revelation, the Antichrist is given authority for 1,260 days. And in the book of Daniel, chapter 12, the end-time distress, such as never occurred on earth, is described as taking place for 3.5 years, 1,260 days. So I wonder which time period of protection is being prophesied in Revelation chapter 12. It's obviously a reference to the prophesied time of the apocalypse at the end of this age. Israel's place in the wilderness is to remind the reader of God's protection of Israel, even during the Exodus, in her 40 years of wilderness wanderings. And it reminds us of Jesus' words in Matthew 24, that when the believers in Jerusalem see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, they're to flee into the wilderness. And as a type, Elijah, when he was persecuted by Ahab and Jezebel, was provided for by God in the wilderness for 3.5 years. James chapter 5. Then after some commentary about Satan's defeat, the allegory continues. Revelation chapter 12, verse 13. And when the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. But the 2 wings of the great eagle were given to the woman, so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place, where she was nourished for a time and times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. Time, and half a time is 3.5 years. So 2 wings of a great eagle are given to the woman, Israel, so that she could be protected in the wilderness. I remember attending a conference hosted by conservative Reformed theologians, and the speaker was addressing Revelation chapter 12, verse 14, critically and disparagingly pointing out that some popular last-time evangelists claimed that the 2 wings of the great eagle refer to the United States. And the speaker laughed, and everyone in the audience chuckled. I mean, who would be so unsophisticated and ignorant to think that these biblical types are referring to the United States? I mean, certainly this eagle must be God. Exodus chapter 19, verse 4, I delivered you on eagle's wings. And Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 11, I carried you on my wings. But wait a minute. In Hosea chapter 13, verse 8, God also describes himself as a bear attacking Israel. So does that mean the prophecy in Daniel chapter 7, verse 5, of a bear ruling over the world, which has universally been understood as the rule of the Persian Empire, does this mean that Daniel chapter 7, verse 5 is really not talking about Persia, but God? That God is the bear with 3 ribs in its mouth? I don't think so. Just because the same illustration of protection is used, an eagle, doesn't mean that the symbol of an eagle doesn't also have an earthly reference. And I would discount the whole idea of an eagle representing the United States if it weren't for the fact that the prophecies of Daniel, which are linked to the prophecies of Revelation, have the animals and the mascots of the four great empires listed as representing those empires. Now, I'm not saying that this reference to an eagle is definitely a cryptic prophecy of the United States taking care of Israel, but it just so happens that the lone superpower in the world that supports Israel has adopted the symbol of an eagle. This would be one of those prophecies whereby one couldn't foretell what was going to happen specifically until it actually takes place. But that prophecy would be confirmed through the prophecy once it takes place. And there are many prophecies like that in Scripture. Well, my point is, don't be so quick to disparage and laugh at such interpretations, to mock the possibility that one of the reasons God has raised up the United States is for the purpose of supporting Israel, and God has blessed the nation accordingly. Now, the text goes on with one more allegory concerning God's protection of Israel in the last days. I want to cover this. Revelation chapter 12, verse 15. And the serpent, the devil, poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman, so that he might cause her to be swept away with the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and drank up the river which the dragon poured out of his mouth. No commentator that I know of professes to know what the earth opening its mouth to drink up the river means, as far as a symbol, a type, an allegory. So commentators mostly ignore it and simply point out the bigger picture that God's people will be protected in the last days. Now, from this text, we may think of Pharaoh's armies who were swallowed up in the sea, or the ground opening up and swallowing the family of Korah. There is also the Old Testament promise that the flood will not hurt you. Isaiah 43:2. When you pass through the waters, I'll be with you, and through the rivers they will not overflow you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be scorched, nor will the flame burn you. Now the text says the serpent, the devil, pours out water from his mouth like a river. Not an actual river, not actual water. And this is coming from the mouth of Satan, meaning the river or the flood or the onslaught is his decree or his influence. Just like later in the book of the Revelation, out of the mouth of the beast comes 3 unclean spirits. A flood can mean an overwhelming force or a resistance, a global attack. And then I saw this t-shirt at a pro-Hamas rally. The t-shirt read, "A flood is coming." And Hamas has called their recent attack on Israel the Al-Aqsa flood. And Islam is accustomed to calling their attacks floods. But it's not until these events take place will God's people know the exact meaning of these words. And the reference to the earth helping the woman, and the earth opening its mouth and drinking up the river which the dragon poured out of its mouth, may refer to some natural occurrence that prevents the enemies of Israel from destroying Israel. Just like the cloud cover over the English Channel in 1944 prevented the Germans from seeing the D-Day invasion. The point is that God will even use the forces of nature to protect his people. And the final verse in Revelation chapter 12, verse 17, so the dragon was enraged with the woman and went off to make war with the rest of her children who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. These are believers in the Lord. If the woman of Revelation 12 is referring to all believers, Jews and Gentiles, then who are the rest of the children of the woman who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus? 2 separate groups are in view. And as Jesus said in John chapter 10, that he has other sheep that are not of this flock, he must bring them also, referring to Gentile believers. So the woman in Revelation chapter 12 seems to be a reference to Messianic Jews in the last day. a final harvest of souls from the nation of Israel at the end of the church age. Thanks for listening. Subscribe, like, share, leave a comment below, and may Jesus Christ reign.